Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar Ortiz, and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. My name is Pilar Ortiz. I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant. And today we have a new guest. And as ever, this is such a privilege to have a podcast because I get to meet people. I can say, come on, talk on the podcast, and then I can get to meet them. So I'm really, really delighted to be meeting Lech Guzowski for the first time. So welcome, Lech.
Hi, Pilar. Great to be here. Finally, we made it. I've been looking forward to it, counting the days in the calendar. Love to be here.
Excellent. Well, you are a workplace culture facilitator. So why don't you tell our listeners what that is?
What I do is work on everything and anything related to culture, workplace culture, as the name suggests. But as we know, culture has probably as many definitions as there are people in the world. Everybody's got a slightly different one. So I'm not a stickler in terms of what a workplace culture is, but I tend to work with what I've identified as the kind of most important building blocks of culture. We start with purpose. We look at values. We look at business priorities and kind of business strategies and how the two connect or work together, because they are not separate things. It's not one or the other. It's both at the same time. We've got communication, psychological safety, how we want to feel when we work together. All of these blocks, it tends to be in kind of 10, 11 key areas that I've most often work with. And we unpick that with my clients, and we look at, how are things at this moment in time in this particular building block? How do they want that to look in the future going forward, right? What do they want to change? And around that, once we've got all these building blocks in place, we formulate a culture workbook or culture book basically for the organization. Not just for it to look pretty and gather dust on the shelf, but actually the next step after that allows us to activate that. We look at, what needs to change in terms of processes, structures, what training, group and individual do people need? What, how do we bring that to life basically? Mm-hmm. So that's the next step. So I tend to work on all these building blocks, and it's a long-term project. As culture is, it's a living organism. It's not something that you do once and you set and forget. No, you set the foundation and then you build on top of that, and that takes time.
One of the things that I've got to know you through, one of the pieces of content that I've got to know you through are your culture micro practices, which you send out. Is it every week? Do I remember
It used
correctly?
to be every week for the first few months, but then I did a straw poll with people on the mailing list saying, okay, is once a week too often? Does that give you enough time? Or do you want to do it, do you want me to do it every 2 weeks to give you a little bit more space so you don't feel rushed that, you've barely just read the first one and thought, figuring out how to implement that. And then there's the next one. So the results were inconclusive. It was quite literally 50-50. So I've made an executive decision to say, listen, okay, we've done 3 months of every week. Now we're going to do 3 months of every second week. Every Monday it goes out. And it's going well. So it's going really well so far. I think that gives enough space for the time being.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, we're going to just fly into not fly into the topic of our conversation, but I think we're already there. We're already talking about culture change. We're already talking about change. We're already talking about introducing new practices. And I think the point of how often can we be introducing something, or how often can we be even considering introducing something? I think that's, and I think maybe for people like you and I who like to, and other people who like to talk a lot about this stuff and who like to help other people change, who like to come in and dig and look around and support, it's very tempting to say, let's try this, let's try this. I think it's very wise of you to poll your readers.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well.
Nice. And so it was one of these culture micro practices that we'd already actually set a date to record, but this came through and I thought, yes, I think this can be really meaty when we're looking at working in a team and of course working in a remote or hybrid team as well. But we can, teams are teams made of people. So this culture micro practice was about understanding conflict responses. So let's just go back. I mean, I love actually the understanding conflict responses. I think that word understanding is really important before we start to resolve anything. So let's start with conflict, because I think that it's a word that, personal opinion here, that I think sometimes it's used in very many different ways, and sometimes conflict is just used for argument. But actually, there's different types of conflict. And so what did you mean by conflict when you talk about it in this micro practice?
Again, similar to, maybe not similar, because probably there are fewer, but there's still quite a few definitions of what a conflict is. And the way I like to look at it is through the lens of the individual, bring it down to kind of the first principles as much as we can. And we look at the individual, and every one of us has a need. Or needs of various types, emotional, psychological, biological, and so on and so forth. And if we are in that situation and then we perceive a threat, somebody blocking that need in whatever way, by doing something, by saying something, and the key word is perceive, that we perceive. It might not actually be the case, but we perceive it as such. And that causes us anxiety, that causes us frustration. That on its own is not yet a conflict. What makes it a conflict is our actions and behaviors as a result of that. So if we, all of a sudden start getting very defensive, very aggressive towards a person, that constitutes a conflict. Right? We act out on that frustration. So it's really important to understand, first of all, what our needs are, and what does that lead to? What does that mean when we interact with other people? How would we behave as a result of that? Conflict for me is any situation where you've got a need and I've got a need, and we want to work out a situation that both our needs are met, because that's often what is being misunderstood, or actually I think the world kind of in society forces us into that mindset of we are very binary. It's either my need or your need, one or the other. Okay. And as tough as it is, because it's don't get me wrong, it's not easy. But a far better approach is it's not one or the other. It's not either or, but both and. Okay, how can my need be met and your need be met at the same time without major compromise on either of the sides, where somebody feels hard done by? And on the one-off chance where okay, we'll sort of compromise, you'll get yours, I'll sort of get mine, I'll feel a little bit hard done by, fine, I can accept that. That's, one time happens, right? Next time it will reverse, it will be the other way around, and fine. If the first scenario where I constantly feel like I'm sacrificing myself, if that happens over weeks, months, and years, that's going to lead to frustration, that's going to lead to resentment.
Yeah. And I think also in the workplace, we also have, I think it's quite interesting to look at what the conflict is about. A lot of the times as well, our need is to get the work done as best as possible. And we just happen to have a different opinion about how that should be done. I really like that separation of task, process, and personal, whether we're clashing because we're different people, and not to speak about clashing for different values, because that is also really interesting. But we've got the task and the process and the personal aspect. So all of those. And so what I was interested in what you in your newsletter, in your micro practice, was the different ways of engaging with the conflict. Because I have another podcast called Management Cafe with Tim Burgess, and we've talked about being in the middle of a conflict as a manager or leader. And he was saying that he's quite conflict avoidant. So he'll avoid conflict, whereas actually I will go straight into it. So I was really interested to see how you've separated these different ways of engaging with conflict. So can you talk us through those?
Of course, I'd love to. I'd love to take credit for this, but unfortunately I cannot. The model I often refer to when it comes to conflict and these responses that you mentioned is the Thomas Kilmann model instrument. instrument for conflict responses. Fantastic tool. It's been developed. Actually, don't know when, but I think it's been a while ago. But basically, what it does, it builds on that definition of conflict, as I said, where we all have needs and frustrations as a result of when somebody's blocking it, and we act out. So basically, what they've done, the two gentlemen, if I believe, they plotted our responses to conflict based on how assertive we are and how cooperative we are. So what you said about your co-host is that he tends to avoid going into conflict, which means, according to Thomas Kilmann, is that he sacrifices his needs and your need, basically. Alternatively, he might be accommodating, saying, okay, fine, I'll hide away my needs. They're not important. Pillar needs are more important. So he's accommodating. Whilst you are going into what Thomas Kilmann says is competing. You're kind of going, not necessarily all guys blazing, but my need is more important. So your assertiveness is high, but your cooperativeness is somewhat low. Let's put it.
It's okay. You can say it. You can say it. The listeners are my friends. They know I'm a bit of everything.
You're trying competing. It's basically you're right. You're right. I'm wrong. Or Tim is wrong, in that sense. And what we're aiming for, obviously, is as cliche as it sounds, we're aiming for win-win, right? We're collaborative response where your need is met, my need is met, or Tim needs is met. That's the hardest one. But the first thing to even thinking about achieving this or being able to achieve this is actually understanding your needs, needs and the other person's needs. Everybody needs to understand their individual needs, because that's where we often clash. We can't truly collaborate and reach that kind of response without everybody individually knowing their needs. What often happens as a result is the fifth step, which is good to move things forward. Because it's sort of a win-win where we compromise. I'll take a little bit of my need, you'll take a little bit of your need, and we can move things on. Again, done once, twice, not a big problem. If you do it repeatedly over months and years, it turns in from a kind of win-win to a lose-lose, because no one ever gets their needs met fully. So that's kind of how so that model is really fantastic. And by the way, I was going to tell you that at the end, I put a little a gift package for your listeners at human.pm/conflict. You'll be able to see the culture micro practices that Pil has mentioned, but also this Thomas Kilmann model article and a couple of other fine resources that will help you with conflict.
Nice. I can see the matrix in front. And thank you very much. I think in how many episodes, I think you are the first one, and if there's someone else, forgive me, guests, but I think you're the first one to actually set up a page for us to support this. This is really, really good. So yes, I'm just looking at the Thomas Kilmann conflict model: competing, collaborating, avoiding, accommodating, and compromising. So there's the two axes, assertiveness and cooperativeness, as you've seen. I suppose for me, what was really interesting was to understand that our nature and our first response into conflict. And just, I think sometimes just by understanding that, like now I can understanding myself and then assume where the other person is, because I think sometimes navigating a difficult situation for me is always about understanding what is going on with the other person as well. And if I can half understand, even in my head, where they are, that already helps me in a way settle a bit more. So I find this very helpful.
We tend to have again, I love these models, I love these frameworks. Humans and yes. Life doesn't work that way. We try and put, things into square boxes, round boxes, all nice and good. There are indicators, right? So take it, of course, with a pinch of salt and make it your own. But what you will find is that you will most likely fall into one or two of these conflict responses as your default. The other ones have to be practiced. And the important bit is it's also context dependent. You might be accommodating at home, but you might be competing at work, or the other way around, right? So you will have, because you've got different needs, although you are the same person at work and at home, obviously there's more psychological, emotional investment at home, for example, right? Because it's easier to disconnect and cut things off at work. And find, it's easier to compete because you don't feel like you have to really care for and live with that person day in, day out. It's easier to sort of separate that. When at home, it's not. So we tend to and obviously different emotions are involved in that. far deeper, I would argue. But yeah, we move around through these. We have defaults. It's easy to change, but they are very much context dependent.
It's a framework as well, yeah, like you were saying. But I think your point about context is key. I mean, for everything, the context is so important. So let's move into that, because another thing that was going through my mind while I was reading this, I was thinking, well, if I look at these different, okay, maybe there are instinctive first responses or are default, but also they might also be strategies. And this is always one of the issues that we've had when thinking about people working remotely with each other and online teams, is that actually it's so much easier to avoid conflict, because a lot of the time the strategy of switching off the laptop or actually just ignoring things because they're not in your face is so. What are your thoughts around that? Around this, we'll say that hybrid is a subset of remote, but what of this new setup of if people are remote? How does this pan out, do you think?
In a way, what you said, being able to shut that laptop, I see that as one of the positives of conflict resolution. It's a minor one, but still, because it gives us the opportunity to take a step back and breathe before we respond. Somebody ticked us off by what they said on Slack. You can step away from your laptop, go to the kitchen, have a tea, and come back, and then look at it with fresh eyes. If this happened in a conversation at work, you wouldn't have that space.
At the office, you mean?
Sorry, at the office. Oh,
just in case.
Yeah, at the office, of course. When you wouldn't have that space, and that's the challenge. What we're trying to do there. We need these breathing spaces because there's always stimulus and there's response. The key thing is in what lies in between, in that space between the stimulus and our response. Because what happens to us, we can't control, but we can control our responses. And when we get a certain outcome that we don't want, you can't change the event, but you can change your responses in the future. So looking at creating these breathing spaces is very, very important. Much easier in a hybrid or remote setup. If we want to take it further, then we really need to look at, okay, how do we build things into the ways we work? And I'm talking here to leaders. How do you lead your team? How do you build in and bake in opportunities for things not to fester? Because as good it is to take time and you have that space to breathe before you react, it's very easy for that to be brushed under the carpet. And that's what we don't want, because yes, you can continue brushing things over the carpet, but as I often say, you will sooner or later trip over it. If not you, somebody on your team, and you don't want that either. So as a leader, you need to figure out, okay, where's the boundary between things being brushed under the carpet and people taking a bit of breathing space, and incorporate in meetings ways of people voicing their concerns, checking in as a leader, making sure that you encourage that people say things that they might be keeping to themselves. That no one's keeping things to themselves. It's not about dragging it out. It's creating an environment where people feel safe and comfortable to share things that are on their chest, that are on their mind, that are annoying them, and they're willing to voice that. So these are kind of the main two things that I would suggest in terms of kind of getting things out into the open. Because in the remote hybrid setup, it's very, very easy for things to, as you said, to fester, to kind of go unnoticed, and we need to kind of pull them out into the forefront so that they don't ruin us in the team, because conflict will happen. It's a natural part of collaboration, but we need to be able to resolve it and talk about it rather than pretending it's not there, because that doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that it is important that conflict is a part of collaboration. And again, we are talking about disagreements on how to do things. If we care, we're bound to disagree at some point, because we all have all our ideas. And I could even argue that if we share less of our immediate context with people, we might even be subject to different kinds of influences. And that, of course, shapes how we think and shapes how we view things. So that's really interesting. And I think that many, many years ago with Lisette Sutherland, I had a virtual coffee with her talking about artificial harmony as well. And this sense of, especially when we have lots of either lots of asynchronous communication, which we don't want to, be the one that spoils the thread, or when we don't have many meetings as well, and we actually don't want to bring everyone down. And in a way, it's we start to avoid anything that could be perceived as conflict or anything that could initiate conflict. So your point about making that space so that these things do come up is, it's really important.
It's authenticity is really, really important when people work together, and people will be able to see through BS. When things are said but not really followed through. And it is really important that teams have that space. So it's not just about having a group therapy session with your team or a coaching session with your team saying, what's your problem, how are you feeling today? No, it's about what happens throughout the 5 working days in a week, how many spaces there are for people to kind of express a minor annoyance, minor disagreement with somebody. Because that's what conflict is about. It's me knowing that you are not happy with how I'm doing things. But who's there to say that my way or your way is better of doing it? So should we really be talking and disagreeing about that? Or should we be talking about the goal? Because ultimately that's what matters. You and I are probably disagreeing because we want the best way of achieving the goal. We want to meet that goal. We want to smash that goal out of the park. And that's what we really are disagreeing about very often. Because we both believe that our way is potentially better in achieving that. That's not relevant. What's relevant is that, can we achieve it? Can we make it better? Yes. Okay, how? Focus on that instead of you're doing it differently the way I would have done it.
Another point around this creating this space, it's especially from a leadership point of view, is that going back to radical candor as well, and setting the conditions for that. I was reading an article by Rachel Happy, who also guested on this podcast, and she was saying how we just need to be a lot more deliberate about addressing this at the same time, because especially if we're someone who's used to those spontaneous interactions in the physical space that everyone loves, and that might be our ways of resolving conflict as well. Those might be our ways of even hashing out something that we're not sure of, and when those spaces are not there, then we just need to be more deliberate about creating those spaces for these things to come up.
Yeah, I think it's the funny thing is, I think we need to be kind of intentional in making it look unintentional, so that's it's natural and authentic, where these conversations happen, when we create these spaces that people actually have room to talk about. Okay, so as a leader, I think it's really on us to be able to do that and encourage that, so that it does feel as natural as possible. And it's far more important in hybrid and remote setups, because we don't see one another. It's easy, as I said, it's easier to avoid things, so it's easy also to keep track of that as a leader, knowing where things, what's going on. And if you're in the office, you feel the tension in the room. You can see what's going on, and even if you can't put your finger on it, you can sense that somebody's in the mood. And then the question is, okay, that person's in the mood. He's in the mood as well. Okay, what's going on? They just had that meeting. So as a leader, it's easier for you to identify that. So if you're in a non-office setup, you need to figure out how the hell are you going to do that with the people on your team, in your one-on-ones, right? How do you incorporate into the one-on-one to find that out? How do you monitor that? So your kind of peripheral vision in that context, in that sense, has to be much, much wider, and you have to have a lot more intention behind it, so that you kind of know what's going on without micromanagement, without kind of interfering. Obviously, that's not what I'm talking about. But in that sense, what I mean is you have to be far more intentional about it, making it look kind of very random and serendipitous and kind of ad hoc.
I agree in the intention. I would disagree. Not conflict, disagreement. that it has to look. I don't agree that it has to look casual and like it's just happened. I think that intentionality and being deliberate is fine in the online space. I suppose what might be what we don't want. Yes, I mean, I understand what you're saying, that we don't want it to feel forced, and we don't want it to feel like and that's difficult. But at the same time, I think that if we can, and God, what you're saying is such hard work, though. but it's true. But it is hard work. The thing is, if we can find, I think where I think what you're saying and what I'm saying kind of merges in the middle is that the intentionalities in designing certain, let's call them processes or routines or something, so that eventually they're part of our DNA and how we work as a team. And then they have that flexibility, if you will. Yeah. And I think that's a very important point, because one of the things I'm seeing that actually both leaders and team members are struggling with is having to give structure to things that we're used to being a lot more fluid and a lot more spontaneous. But that's the remote space. So that's fine as well. That's okay. You can feel like that. Yeah. So really, I like that peripheral vision thing very much.
Yeah, I'm going to note that down, because I literally just came up with that and I actually like it. So I'm going to go with that. It might come out.
Yeah. It's great to podcast. These things happen.
I've got the same reasons for being a podcaster. Just I'd love talking to people. It's great. You learn from others, but even if you don't learn from somebody else on a particular day, you will, through verbalizing what's in your head, helps you understand it better. But I digress. Coming back to conflict, yes, there has to be a lot more intentionality, a lot more work in the effort of trying to simplify your dilemma a little bit, and how hard it is for us to talk about this conflict situation, because it's a difficult topic. Let me offer an option to reframe conflict. First of all, we already mentioned it's a natural part of collaboration. You can't avoid it. People coming together in any setting, there are bound to be sparks for different reasons. We have to accept that. If you can accept that, half the battle is already won. You're already making things easier for yourself. The second thing is understanding conflict through a lens of when does it need to happen. Because there are times, especially if you look at, again, from a leader's perspective, as your team is developing, as your team is maturing, depending on, again, you can use different models. You can use Tuckman, you can use Susan Whelan. There is one stage where conflict, they're even named cold. One is storming, I think, according to Tuckman. And according to Susan Whelan, it's counter-dependency and fighting.
Wow, I haven't heard of it like that.
I'm pretty certain. I need to look at that, but I think so. But it's on the tin. I mean, seriously, and it needs to happen, because what happens in the first stage when the team or group comes together, everybody's happy. Everybody wants to be included. Everybody wants to be part of the team. No one's going to be disagreeing, so everybody's going to be looking to the leader. Okay, what do we need to do? How do we need to do that? What's our objective? What are our goals, right? Okay, everybody's looking at it because no one else is. So you need that one person that is in charge. If there is not a designating leader, sooner or later one will emerge naturally at that early stage. But then as time progresses, everybody's already sitting at the table. Everybody's happy. They've got their spot. So they're getting a little bit too comfortable. When somebody says something that annoys them, they'll go, actually, you know what? I disagree. And that tends to escalate. And that's what needs to happen. Teams need to figure out their boundaries, their roles, their responsibilities, how they interact with one another, what they agree and disagree with, and how they work with the leader. So if you go with that kind of model, in that second stage, the leader is still kind of the center of attention that the teams come to for guidance and for support, but it's not just the leader. They're already talking to one another. They're already disagreeing with one another, and they're already also questioning the leader and their role in the team setup. So if you look at that, you need to adapt your leadership style. First one is very much directive. Everybody's looking up to you. Second one requires you to coach, because the team's trying to gain autonomy. Human development is very, very similar. That question of authority will continue to happen. So if you look at conflict through that lens, that it needs to be part of it. You know that it's already part of working together, but also that it's necessary for the team to develop its core, its structure. The performance will dip. That's normal. But then it will shoot out once they've established themselves really, really well. That will really help you understand that conflict is this accumulation of energy, that if you handle it poorly, or sweep it under the carpet, one or the other, it will unfortunately blow up in your face. But if you harness that energy of conflict, all that energy that goes into conflict, of people who are meaning well and want the best for the team and for the company, if you resolve that and use that as fuel, your team and the organization is going into completely new heights.
I'm also thinking that in the same way as we look at Tuckman's model and say every time a new person joins the team, we become a new team and you start the cycle. I'm also thinking, and maybe maybe someone's already looked at this, that how much the context, thinking about remote and hybrid, how much that has turned us into a new team in a way. And how just when we need everyone to be in full performance and full performing stage, we're actually going back to that forming, going back to that storming as well. And how just finding, this could go in a team identity as well. Where does that come into it? It's I think organizations, I think we've all underestimated how much all the different aspects that this change is having.
Yeah, I think I'm often when I talk about this topic, I often get that question of people say, we're established team, and somebody else comes in, we start off, we're at the same place. No, it does reset. Again, this is just a model. It's not linear. First of all, and most of all, it's not linear. So it's not easy. We're at this step. We're in this step. No, it's not that simple. So arguably, with that in mind, you can also say that when you've got a mature team and somebody new joins, and it is a cherry-picked person, because whoever was doing the recruitment for that team, they looked at that team, they looked at the structures, they looked at the values, they looked at the personalities, they looked at the goals, everything, and they picked a person that will say, okay, we feel that this is going to be the best fitting person for this role. Versus going, okay, just give us job spec, job responsibilities, and we'll, do a copy and paste. We'll find somebody that sort of fits, but we're not going to screen them. You're not going to chat to them. You're not getting a feel for them. We'll just kind of parachute them in, right? That's going to be more difficult. But assuming that first scenario where you've really cherry-picked that person, yes, you will likely reset, because everybody needs to find their way. That new person needs to find their way, push their boundaries. But I would argue is that then you potentially will move through these arbitrary stages much quicker, because the resolution, the number of variables is lower, and there's hopefully that person's already really been matched well ahead of time.
Yeah, completely. Thank you. So if we're looking then at, I'm trying to find the segue. From this now, managed to get us into a whole of
just pretend that there was a commercial break. We're back after the break.
We're back after the break. So I'm thinking that. So we've got two things in my mind, which is the challenge for when we're working away from each other, whether it's away in location or away in time. So depending on what kind of setup we have, hybrid, remote. Office first, remote first. I mean, this is another thing now that we're really looking at so many different ways of looking at this. And so we've got, one is the danger of team members becoming so conflict avoidant that the work suffers and actually our collaboration suffers. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have lots of conflict that can be emerging, and we don't have that breathing space, not just to move away from it, but to really work through it. Or the other one I'm thinking is that as someone who's in charge of a team, we can suddenly become so disconnected that we don't know there's conflict everywhere. So those are the three scenarios that I'm thinking of. What are some things, I suppose, that we can, I mean, you've already been talking about some things we could be doing, but what are some of the foundations maybe that we can lay down to tackle some of that? I mean, we're not going to solve everything,
I don't think we're going to solve it. And hybrid and remote is very, it's different. We need different tactics for sure, as we already mentioned. But at the end of the day, the fundamentals are the same. Mm. So as much as a lot of it is on the leader to figure things out and lead the team accordingly to help them out. One of the things is that, he or she or they need to put that onto the team, on the individuals, right? So the understanding conflict responses. Well, my leader, my manager is not going to know my conflict responses if I don't know them. What even if they do? How is that going to help me and the people I work with? So it's putting some of that onto the team, right? So that cultural micro practices that brought us together for today is encouraging that, is having people, so you can do it synchronously, you can do it asynchronously, for people to reflect on what's their default, and simply doing that by the last 3 situations over the past 2 weeks that they've had where there was a bit of friction in the conversation, and writing that down for themselves, and then going into Slack and sharing, listen, based on this, I've identified that I normally do this, that this is my default. You get the whole team to do it, and all of a sudden, people have a better understanding of one another. And you kind of build on that. The same as all the personality tests and things like that, MBTIs. I love them. I love them. Are they giving us all the answers? Absolutely not. But they are fun. And are they personalized? MBTI definitely is not personalized. It's way too kind of too broad and too rigid. But is it a fantastic conversation starter and door opener for somebody who hasn't ever done it? Absolutely, flippantly. Every single time. I do one-on-one coaching. Occasionally, I often give people to get people to do that test, and they've never done it before. Eyes open. I remember the first time I've done it, and I'm kind of going, "Whoa! Why is there not a picture of me next to this definition? Because it just really sounds like me." And the funny thing is, I'll never forget this. The first time I've done it, we're doing as part of a team, and I came out 50-50 on literally 50-50 out of on the extrovert and introvert, which is so me. And my friend who was leading the workshop and was doing the results, he just started laughing when he saw the results, and he going like, "Mate, that is so you." And it fitted perfectly. So they're fascinating and fantastic door openers to learning more about one another, because ultimately, as I mentioned in kind of the needs based definition of conflict, you need to know yourself first to be able to know how to work in a team. Self-leadership, self-reflection, or being authentic in that sense is very, very important.
Yeah, I think we've always known that the self-awareness when we're working remotely we're working away from each other is, I would argue, more important than when we are in person, just because there is that distance, and we've got to understand when it's us and when it's the team dynamics and when it's, context. And it just requires us, I think, to have a better understanding of human nature, which is the irony, because we've always thought that remote work dehumanizes us. And actually, I've always argued it's the contrary. If you really want to do it well, you've got to get closer. And this is another dimension, I think, the conflict dimension, in which we have to understand each other and understand ourselves first. So yeah, I think that's beautiful. Use it as a get to know each other better. So, and let's not shy away from it as well, because it's tricky, and it's tricky in different cultures, and it's tricky for different individuals and different setups. So
yeah. I think, we've got this expectation. I often arrive at this conclusion and use it in my workshops, especially when we talk about communication. I don't know where it came from. I'm curious, but we've got this weird expectation that people, are able to read minds.
Yes,
it's it's the classic example of when a couple fights and the guy's like, "Well, you should have known." How? Yeah. Where? We've been dating for 3 months. This is a new thing. How could I know? So it's about really not having that expectation. So again, catching yourself, right? That when you're frustrated, when you're annoyed with somebody, why are you annoyed with them? Is it something that they've done? Yes, that's something that they did or say. Okay, what buttons did they push? What X, Y, and Z? Okay, why did particular buttons were pressed? What is there bad? Okay, because this touches on, but they couldn't have known that this, I've had this experience, some emotional trauma a few years ago. They couldn't have known.
Yeah.
And it kind of, it's reverting that. So in communication and conflict, don't expect people to be mind readers. Give as much as annoying as is the benefit of doubt. It's difficult. Yes, you're in the moment. You're annoyed. Your frustrations, emotions are boiling over. That's normal. You're human at the end of the day. That's why I'm a massive supporter and massive fan of all sorts of guides and manuals to me, as I like to call them. It's basically everybody creates, okay, what's my communication style? How do I want to be communicated? What's my time when I'm checking my emails? What's my preferred means of communication? Do I prefer emails over Slack messages? Or instead of phone calls and long emails, just send me a Loom video where you're doing a screen recording, walking me through the design of the website or whatever, right? When's the best time to contact me, or how am I behaving when I'm under pressure? What does that mean, right? When the deadlines are tight, I become very direct to the point, and I don't have time for politeness and fluffiness, but I never mean any disrespect. I need to let you know that.
And review.
yeah. And I need to let you know that, because I can't expect you to know all of these things unless we've been working together for God knows how many years, and we've been doing, various different projects, and you've seen me in all types of scenarios under all sorts of emotional stresses, duresses, and happy moments.
And of course, there is that extra, just to start wrapping up, but there's that extra type of conflict. Well, it's not a kind of conflict, but it's a conflict around something we never thought we might have conflict around, which is whether we work in the office, whether we work remotely, and the conflict that we're seeing now a lot of the time from people in organizations making the decisions versus the people who are not making those decisions, and that those arguments actually, and the pushback, but also maybe even anything that can come up from people working in different spaces and therefore having different experiences day to day at work, and how that's shaping us. So I wanted to just ask you about is something that you mentioned when we first started to talk, and I thought that was really interesting, that you were saying that whether actually should we be trying to merge the office experience and the remote experience, or should we run them parallel? Should we just say, look, maybe it's actually better to run them parallel to each other? What are your thoughts around that? What are your thoughts over the last few months? Because we started this conversation a while ago.
I often call myself a cultural square peg, because I'm not in favor of traditional organizational approaches to culture. Not all of them, some of them. This is one example. I genuinely can't find an argument. I haven't heard an argument that would really convince me, apart from a very specific location related reason for somebody to be in the office. What difference does it make where I am when working? Whether it's in the office, whether it's at home, or whether it's in the Bahamas. As long as the job is done, that's what matters. So the cultural square peg element comes in here. Shift from time and time worked, hours spent in the office or spent working, and move on to, is the job done? And is it done to the agreed specification? That's what matters. We need that narrative and mindset shift for sure. So that's the very kind of preamble to try and answer your question. And and in relation to that, I think we need to run parallel, because we're trying to, you're not going to be able to ever replicate it fully. One or the other, they are different. You need different ways of working. You need different tools, different structures, different processes. So actually trying to merge them, is it possible? Arguably, yes, but it requires a hell of a lot of effort. So I think it's better to try and aim and run these parallel as close to one another as possible, but with, dedicated rules for hybrid/remote working, in terms of, when times that people overlap in terms of working hours and how things are done, how things are communicated in meetings and so on and so forth, and a separate one for the office. But the aim is to have them as close and interlinking, if possible, to one another for that to work. Because otherwise, I think it's just a bit of a fool's errand trying to create one unique set of rules for both.
Yeah, I'm also wondering whether the cultural aspect is going to be so important in defining. I mean, we have to get rid of the word hybrid. That for me is out. It means nothing.
I don't think it works. I think it's one of those of, it's a stopgap. We're just like, okay, we don't really want people to go and work remotely. We want them to be out in the office. Cynical me thinks, because we've got a lease for 5 years and we need to justify the expense we can't get out of it. So we want people, sitting at their desks. That's obviously very, very cynical of me. I appreciate that. But at the same time, Ken, what's the reason? Why do people have to be in the office? The cultural element is very, very important. Don't get me wrong. I love remote working. I can't imagine not having it. Because it lets me work with people from Australia, US, in Europe, everywhere and anywhere, depending on how much or how little sleep I want to get based on the time zones. But ultimately, nothing's going to replace human energy in the room. A workshop done face-to-face with 20 people sitting in the same room will produce substantially better quality results than a workshop done online. Online will be great. If you're a good facilitator, you still can do that. But that peripheral vision that we use in terms of conflict, that works. And I don't know what's going on with you, but I can sense that I can see my subconscious and my conscious things is picking up what's going on around me when I'm in a physical room. I can't replicate that online. So there are places where and activities and things that we do as a team and that are important for our culture that need to be done in face-to-face setup. But therefore, we need to rethink office. Yes, absolutely, but not as it used to be. Not that everybody goes in there Monday to Friday, but everybody goes in there twice a week, and we focus on things that we can't do online, or we can't do as well online as we can in real life. So it's more about, if you've got loads of meetings and you're going to be on Zoom, I'm sorry, stay at home. But if you want random interaction and you want the energy of people and you want to collaborate and have brainstorming within the same space, run to the office very, very quickly and use that space and change the way we approach and what we do and where. I think that's the most important bit.
Okay, good. Well, you have very kindly put some of the stuff that we've been talking about together over at human.pm/conflict. So thanks very, very, very much, Lech Guzowski. You have the We Got This podcast. Just tell us a little bit about this, because of course we have podcast listeners listening. They might well be interested in hopping over to your feed.
Absolutely. A shameless plug. Yes. We Got This is a podcast focused on culture, surprise, surprise, where I talk to individuals that tend to be business owners, heads of HR, heads of people, CEOs, trying to find out how they do things in their organization, and all types of really cool people-focused activities and initiatives, cultural initiatives that they run within their organization, so that others can learn from that, right? So it's not something that we solve problems and give you things on a silver platter. Absolutely not. Quite the opposite. We provide materials, we provide food for thought for you to think, okay, is this going to work in my organization? Partially, but I've got an idea how to build on, how to adapt that, what we can do with that. Okay, so that's kind of the premise of that. We often discuss broad topics like employer branding, what that looks like, what it's about. I recently had Marcin Florian from Spotify, where we're talking about myths surrounding leadership and diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are a very important topic. So if you travel, if you need something to listen to while you're cooking, these are kind of the perfect episodes for longer drives. They tend to be about 40 to 50 minutes long, but it's not that you will be taking notes of prescribing or me prescribing how you should do things, but it's something that needs to kind of go into your brain for you to analyze, digest, and I'm sure something great's going to come out of it.
That's our kind of show, isn't it, listeners? So you can find We Got This podcast anywhere where you're listening to this. I'm sure it will be there as well. And of course, you can sign up to the micro practices over at human.pm/conflict. Lech, thank you very much for visiting us.
It's been a pleasure. It's been definitely worth the wait. We've been planning it. We had the dates in the diary. It was definitely worth the wait. Thank you very much for having me.
A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.